Hello everyone, welcome to the Ineffablelse. Welcome if you are new here. Please subscribe to the channel and share this video and any of the others around. I mainly focus on astrology and relationships in my videos. And thank you to everyone who's subscribed, especially while I was away doing the Camino de Santiago. That was really heartwarming. So today I'm going to talk about the Camino de Santiago, which me and my partner took part in throughout all of August, and what my personal experience was and the lessons I learned and some things you might want to know if you're considering doing it. So let me start by defining what exactly the Camino de Santiago is. Santiago is Saint James, and little did I know until I arrived in Compostela that he was one of Jesus's 12 disciples, and he himself was a pilgrim who travelled from the Middle East and Christianized Hispania. So he's one of the very first Christians in Spain, and so that's why it's a pretty big deal that he's buried there. His remains were found there, and they were found when a huge cluster of stars were over this field, and it, a bit like with Christ, it directed people to go there and search, and they found his remains. So this is a field of stars. So in Spanish, Campo de Estrellas. So that turns into Compostela. Santiago de Compostela, St. James of the Field of Stars. So it is now a very big hub city with a lot going on there, and a lot of tourists and a lot of trade and a lot of pilgrims. But the remains of this disciple are buried there, and there is a huge cathedral built around him. And this is the destination of all of the Caminos that go there, and it's one of the only pilgrimages in the world still taken on foot. Not many people walk to Mecca or to Rome, so it's a very special, significant thing to do. And with the astrological element, of course, it really intrigued me. So there are so many different routes you can choose. Portuguese, the French way is the most popular. There's even an English way where you can get a boat to the north and then walk a short distance. But we chose to do the Camino del Norte, which is very beautiful. It goes through all of the northern cities and towns. I wanted desperately to meet the north of Spain, so this was a great opportunity. Now it has a lot more ups and downs, a lot more hills than the French way, which is very flat. But it also has a lot more shade. So I think it was a good choice to do this in August. In the past, the pilgrims were monks and people who wanted to walk the way to pay tribute to the relics and the tomb of the disciple St. James. It was also the frontier, the boundary where the Muslim Empire and the Asturian kingdom met, so it was a very dangerous place to go. So in the past there were many hospitals along the way, not just for blisters and tendinitis, but also for if you'd been robbed or stabbed or attacked by anyone you met along your way, including all of the other pitfalls that can befall you in the 1,000 years since this pilgrimage started being taken. Now it was repopularized again in the last century. The amount of people doing it now is more and more year on year, apart from last year when it fell dramatically for COVID. The thing with pilgrimage and the thing with these numbers is that many people fall from the way, and the way can be likened to life itself, and taking this kind of spiritual path for a specific amount of time, it's usually a month walking. It's a big sacrifice. It's a sacrifice to your time, and it makes you meet yourself and meet your boredom and push through a lot of blocks. And what I observed is a lot of people interested in the Camino for the fun of it, for different reasons that were not purely of a nature of purifying yourself. You know, there are people that do it for sporting reasons, people that do it for religious reasons, Mine was definitely much more along the spiritual side of confronting myself and confronting my personal blocks physically and mentally and moving through them.
When you look for me, I will be there. Within the power of love, within the power of light. When you look for me, I will be there. Within the power of love, within the power of light. When you look for me, I will be there. Within the power of love, within the power of light, I will be there. I will be there. Within the power of love, within the power of light, I will be there. I will be there.
What I could see in other people was an aimlessness. Now, a lot of people who are lost end up doing the path because it's a great thing to do if you are grieving, if you've lost someone, if you are unsure what to do, if you have lost your job. Just walk. It just gives you a plan. For a period of time, you just walk and walk and walk. I'd met somebody who had lost their niece, who was aged 18, from cancer. Within 4 months, she had died. So she started to walk. This year, she came back to do the final 2 weeks. And later, she had terrible blisters after 2 weeks, and she stopped. And that was 3 years ago. And then this year, she came back to do the final 2 weeks. There were others who were doing it as a nice holiday, you know, doing a few days here or there to see a nice place and just walking part of the path. And there's nothing wrong with that, each to their own. I'll probably do the same at some point with other parts, other routes. But for me, that's not pilgrimage in the true sense of what you can get from the Camino de Santiago. This is a very, very personal journey that you take with yourself. It's almost ascetic in that traditional sense, although I don't believe in suffering for our sins, but I do believe in becoming okay with suffering, becoming okay with a difficult situation, and realizing the temporary nature of everything, which is exactly what this Camino offers you, especially in the north of Spain, where the weather is much more like the British Isles. It's very, very changeable, wet, cloudy. Again, clouds are very useful for walking, but it changes all the time, so you can never be settled knowing what the weather will be like for one day. And in this day and age, we have so much comfort, and this is why I want to call this the need for modern day pilgrimage, because we have so much comfort, we have everything we could possibly want all of the time in the Western world. And to do something tricky and hard, I think it pays very well for humans to do something like this. The other thing to remember is that it actually scientifically takes 1 month to form a habit. So if you do something every day for a month, then you have that entrenched in your psyche, and it's much easier to continue after having done that. This rhythmic routine of walking every day, challenging your preconceived ideas of limitation. And then there's the challenges of high mountains, very steep, very difficult, but then also very long, flat pieces of asphalt, and the tedium that then ensues, and being okay with both. Again, because you know, they're only temporary. The beautiful thing about the northern way is that you have a lot of beaches along the way, so you can even stop in the middle of the day and go for a swim and then continue. Now, the way that you do the route is by following yellow arrows and yellow scallop shells. And while I was away, I bought this hat, and then I knew that the scallop shell was a sign of the Camino, so I sewed one on. And I found out when I went to the museum that this was the old symbol to show and indicate to other people that you were a pilgrim. So you would be taken into their homes, you would be left alone, people would know where you were going. This is a symbol. The scallop symbol is also like a hand, and it's supposed to show you're willing to receive, and you're also being guided, because if we call Santiago as being here, all the routes lead to the same place. And this isn't Santiago as if it's the best place in the world. This is everything, every path comes to the same place in the end, which is the divine. Now, the wonderful thing is the simplicity. You don't have to think about anything for an entire month other than following these arrows and letting your feet guide you, take you, carry you. Noticing the nature around you, observing the interactions of human beings, continuing, because you've basically put your life on hold in one sense, and you can observe other humans doing what they do. You can observe other pilgrims, which was another part that I will get onto in a bit. But one thing that we did was to do it without any kind of painkiller, without any kind of alcohol, only ice and stretching. Now, stretching could be a whole video, and I never emphasize this enough when I've spoken to people about this, but stretching at the beginning of the day and the end of the day was just gave me a new body and a new opportunity every day. And whilst others were drinking, I was stretching. And then I saw those same people quit because they were not resting properly. And this was a micro version of life itself. We did it without painkillers and alcohol, and we also didn't really rest properly. We were sleeping in all different places. We slept under trees, we slept in parks, we slept in children's playgrounds, we slept under benches, we slept in several cemeteries, very peaceful. We slept in the old traditional patios of churches which have roofs and wind protection, and that was beautiful, although some of them were with lights, which I'm not sure about what that is for. Some of them were much more rural and traditional, and they were extremely peaceful, and we had some of the best night sleeps there. And the other place we went to, we would go to a few different albergues. We didn't go to any in the Basque country because they were shut for COVID, but we went to several donativos where you give what you feel. These were always the highest standard of the albergues. Albergue is the Spanish term for hostel, where you share a room with many people. It actually leads me to the issue of human interactions, because this was where I could really observe people. And I saw how much conversation is a waste of time and energy. And there was a lot of convincing strangers about a different identity. A lot of people showing their best self with strangers, and it makes me think about how often we do that, especially in this world and especially in cities, and especially with dating applications. We always just want to show the best of ourselves, and then people don't have enough time to get to know us properly. I think I was very blessed that I had Ricardo with me, and I wasn't looking in that way. There were a lot of people searching, a lot of sort of people searching for human connection, and I really saw men in particular closing in on women. I heard people breaking their own promises and accepting things that they said that they didn't want. I also heard a lot of talk of unity and community and caring for the fellow pilgrims, and yet the behaviour was inconsiderate at best, and thievery, aggression and harassment at its worst. And all in all, it was a delve back into physical human proximity for me, as I've been away from that for quite a long time. And it was a confirmation of a disillusionment with human interactions in general that I experienced. It meant that the few true acts of human presence and the human kindness that I witnessed, they held great significance. And I felt so extremely grateful to have Ricardo the whole time is a key, because many people would talk each other out of walking, and I observed people lying. I'll talk about one man in particular who I don't understand why, but in some ways I do. But he was lying about how much he'd been walking, and he was taking buses in between places. Now, quite a few people were taking buses, and we didn't take any buses. We didn't drink any alcohol, we didn't take any painkillers. And probably on the way, people saw me in some pretty angry states because I was having to feel everything. I was having to feel the pain of all of my inadequacy and all of my lack of training. And luckily, I actually was humble enough to listen to advice that was given. And when I got a blister, I started putting Vaseline on my feet in the mornings, which meant I didn't get a single blister again after that. And when I got tendinitis in my knees because too much pressure was being put on my knees because I needed to develop more thigh muscles, I started icing my knees. And it was amazing when I was sitting in the street with Ricardo and this ambulance came past and they asked me if I was okay, and I was like, yeah, because I was sitting on the ground in lots of pain. I couldn't even walk on the flat because my knees were so inflamed. And Ricardo was like, I think she could do with some help here. And then they came over and just checked my knees out, put my mind at rest, knowing it was something that wouldn't last forever, and gave me a bag of ice and explained what I needed to do and told me that I needed to go in the sea, and that was the best medicine, was to go and stand in very, very cold water and let the inflammation go down. There were many little miracles like that all along the way, but I then saw the contrast of that then being in an albergue with someone who said, I've got terrible blisters, I've got terrible pain in my knees, and I gave the advice and I said how it had benefited me. And then I saw him a few days later in another albergue, and he was still complaining about the same thing, still hadn't done anything about it. And then he started drinking, and when he started drinking he started talking. And then he started saying that he got a bus for this stage and this stage and this stage. He'd hardly seen any of the path because he'd been on buses. But he'd been telling people he'd started even before us, in the town before we had. And there's one reason I can understand why he's lying, because he wants to get a bed, because these are hostels that are purely for pilgrims. And it means you can go to bed early, it means that everybody understands what you're doing, and there's a feeling of camaraderie. That's the other thing I think he wanted. He wanted the fun and the alcohol and the experience of being a pilgrim without actually doing the walking. But on the other hand, I don't understand who he's lying to, because he's lying to himself. And really, if this is about connecting with the divine, this omnipresent thing, who are you lying to about that? It is a known that you have not done what you said you have done. I then saw other people who were taking buses and they felt very guilty about it, and getting taxis and feeling guilty about it. I don't think it's an issue of feeling guilty, but certainly if for that particular stage you haven't walked anything, don't take a bed from a pilgrim who's walked 30 kilometers in that day. There are private hostels, private albergues where you can go for these things. Especially this year, it being COVID, a lot of the albergues, the public ones, were only 30% capacity. Yeah, it was quite sad as well at times because we weren't allowed to cook in the kitchens. There was also all of this reflection of society and how people were and how people had shut down in different ways, and the absurdity of seeing all the restaurants packed full of people, packed together, all the bars packed with people, no masks, watching football, spitting, and then just to be in an albergue with a handful of people and not being able to use a kitchen, where the handle of the door had been broken off and we couldn't get into the kitchen to cook anything. Food, the other thing, we weren't eating in restaurants. We didn't go to any restaurants, and this meant that we ate a lot of raisins, coconut and almonds mixed together, and then lots of jars of beans and jars of peas. So again, it made you really, really tap into gratitude and just the amazing thing that is cooked food when you can get it, and the warmth of making something and having something made with love. It's not about having a luxurious time while you're traveling and staying in lots of lovely hotels and things. As far as I'm concerned with a pilgrimage, it's about stripping back and seeing how much you can get by with as little. Less is more. And the interesting thing about the thing taking as long as it does is that you do see the same people again. With this man who was lying, it was funny to see that he skipped a few stages to be ahead of us. we were fast and we caught up with him. And he saw me and his eyes said one thing, but what he said was something quite different. "Oh, it's so lovely to see you!" And it's funny, this being found out, as if we can hide anything from anyone. It's all known.
There is an infinite power coming from within. There is so much love to share, so much to see. In the waters of life, there is always a light. Just look at it and follow your heart. Because this is a time to find your being. It's time to sing, it's time to be what you really got to be. Don't give up, and from the north you will rise and spread your wings. Now realize that your flight is high and your dream now is clear. Listen to the river, listen to the waters, listen what they say. Singing hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Singing hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Please never forget to give thanks. Give thanks, give thanks, give thanks and pray. Give thanks, give thanks, give thanks and pray. Singing hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Singing hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Singing hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. Singing hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh.
And I just want to mention something about what I saw with the women, because I was very, very lucky to have Ricardo with me, because the moments when I was not with him, when he was faster than me and I was lagging behind, many men would come and they would slow down to walk with me, but not in a direct way, in a way where they would bend down to tie their shoelace, stand up, look over their shoulder, be waiting around, hovering, and I would walk faster, and then they would walk faster, and then I would slow down, and they would slow down. And I made a post about this on my Instagram account. I was wearing a t-shirt that said "Girls supporting girls," which I actually found in a hostel in one of these boxes where they said take it, stuff that's been left before. So I decided to wear this t-shirt whenever I was in a hostel, and I experimented with not replying if a man said hello, and also just not initiating any conversation with men, and then seeing what would happen. And the thing that really, really shook me was just how angry they became, because I wasn't feeding any of their addictions. I wasn't behaving in the standardized conformist way where the woman really sacrifices a lot of herself to please men. And I'm not saying this just from some kind of conceptual feminist principle. I'm saying it because I was traveling with my partner and he had women interested in him, and if they came over, they were quite direct, wanted to speak with him. If he wanted to speak with them too, he would engage. If not, he'd be doing his own thing. They would get the message and they'd leave him alone. With me, it wasn't like that. If I didn't initiate something, they would be waving, hello, hello. And then again, in other hostels I would see them again and they would try and get my attention. They would flick my hat to try and make me look up. Super invasive all the time. And this is from fellow pilgrims, and this was supposedly spiritual people, but very demanding. I also had something, explicit sexism and harassment, walking out in the field alone, and in the side of a cornfield there was a farmer there with his trousers down, laughing at me as he's masturbating. And it just makes you feel like, well, I can't enjoy this trip. I'm not particularly safe. Another man followed me in his van. He drove up the hill and he came down again. And he drove up again and then waited at the top of the hill. And there was no one else around. It was very, very, very steep hill, very early in the morning. And there was another pilgrim, and she saw this and she waited for me. And I was mostly focused on the intensity of the path and how hard it was. So I hadn't really paid attention to what he was doing, but he was waiting there for me, and she stood there looking at him, and she flashed her knife at him, and he looked at the ground, didn't know what to do, and as I walked past he tried to get my attention, and then he got back in his van and then drove down. And these sort of situations, you could say, are me being paranoid or these things, but it's when you then hear how many women have had this happen to them, and then you see how often this gets reported, that it makes you aware. The thing with anything, it's that there's a law of attraction in motion. So if you come on one of these trips and you are full of love and full of light and really want to trust the world and trust everything, then you might get bitten by your own beliefs and get shown the other side of the coin. Equally, if you're very bitter and very angry and negatively disposed to humans, but you're open, you may come on these kind of trips and be shown the other side of the coin, which is the goodness of humanity and the kindness of people, which exists. It does exist. But as I've been asking so much after a lifetime of people pleasing and being very glass half full, optimistic, positive about everything, to be shown the darker side of human consciousness has been very, very positive for me in terms of developing a more balanced and realistic view of the world. One other point I'd like to mention before I move on is the point of human consideration. And there was a lot of talk, and there was a lot of the story about being kind to one another and caring for one another and helping one another on the road. Many times what I actually saw was men approaching women who wanted to be alone and being asked, are you okay? Are you okay? Do you need some help? Do you need someone to walk with? And more for a sense of their own validation. And instead of at night, when we need to rest and we need peace, people were going and drinking a lot, eating a lot very late, and then coming back to sleep and snoring incredibly loud, or coming back stoned and shining a torch all around the room in people's faces while they were sleeping, because they're kind of not very with it. And it was very, very entertaining to see all of this. And at the end of the day, because of everything changing all of the time and all of the opportunities to rest in the middle of the day, which was probably when we got some of our best sleep, it meant that we could really laugh as we saw all of these things unfolding from the people who were saying how important it was to care for others who were then just not. Meanwhile, I was wearing this t-shirt and it said girls supporting girls, and just wearing that and looking in the faces of different women was very, it was disarming for them, and they would always smile, and I would always get this little cheeky response, which was heartwarming, because I didn't really feel like talking with many people, but I was friendly, at least with the women. But it was funny to put on these different identities and just realize that sometimes it's better to be seen as a bitch and be left alone, rather than be very charming and sweet and then be expected to bolster the egos of many men who want to take your time, take your energy, and interfere with your path. I saw some people quit the Camino as well, because many people around them said, yes, just quit if you don't feel good, just give up and go home. Ricardo said to me on a couple of occasions when my knees were really bad, he's like, if you can't continue, you have to go back. You have to go home. So can you? And then I would have to dig deep and really find, no, I can continue. But I need to do the necessary things. I need to take off. I took off one day to rest and ice my knees, stayed with some nuns, and then we continued. Where I saw other people with the same injuries as me, they just had to drop off. Now, all of that is very boring for me to talk about, because the most interesting thing that I learnt the most from animals, their ability to just share company without speaking, without uttering anything. Just be. And this is what we can do as humans, really, in terms of deep, true human connection. Sometimes to just be in silence and share a space, that's extremely powerful. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. You can just be, and they can be. And I see that with animals, is that state of being in love. And these were some of the deepest connections that I've ever had. And then seeing how other animals were responding to Ricardo was a confirmation of his profound state of inner peace. So one day while I was walking about 500 meters behind him, I saw a donkey come running across a field, so happy, eeyoring, like, eeyore, just to see him, just to connect, just to get a little stroke. And he greeted him like an old friend, like he knew him. It was surreal. And they'd never met before. And that was the most enjoyable thing about walking all the way through countryside and fields and feeling the and just being, when you're in your lowest point, being greeted by a beautiful animal. We enjoyed the company of goats, cows, horses, sheep, donkeys, cats, chickens, llamas, camels, fish, pigs, and 1,000 dogs. I can't explain how many dogs we met along the way, and the variety, and every single one was my favourite dog that I'd ever met. But then also there was the flip side of that, which was meeting, for example, these big beefy horses. And I thought, wow, you're so strong, aren't you beautiful? What a beauty. And stroking this horse's nose, and then Ricardo mentioned, you do realise that this is horse meat. This is going to be sold to the French market. And it just broke my heart. It's one thing when you see cows and you've come to some kind of acceptance or conformity around the fact that we eat cows, but when you're there with a horse and then you realise that this is going to be eaten, it really shook me for the rest of the day. Then also just being in the proximity to animals and seeing how even the small farms where they have cows, they treat them, they're walking around in their own filth, they're chained up, and it's not such a nice thing to see. Seeing that firsthand reaffirmed my total confusion about meat eating. And then also reminded me of the line in Genesis where it said, "Behold, I've given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seed, and this shall be your food." And just how disconnected we are from that, that reality that we have everything we need in the form of plants to sustain us, especially now. Yeah, we also stayed a few days with the 12 tribes, and that was an experience in itself in San Sebastian. To revisit them, I'd been with them before, and to go back there after 4 years and really dig deeper into their beliefs and how they live, because it's very curious to me. They're labelled as a cult or a sect, but as far as I can see, the whole world is a cult or a sect. We all just subscribe to a group of beliefs and then stick rigidly to them. So I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm not saying it's a rare thing either. It's everywhere. And they really do try their best to be as the original disciples of Jesus. And they follow the Bible, but particularly the Old Testament, religiously. And they even do things like they respect the Sabbath as the true day of rest. And yet they don't follow that quote I've just said from Genesis, which is, and also the commandments not to kill. But they were extremely kind and hospitable, and their belief in the importance of the immune system was admirable, and family, the importance of family, and the difficulty of raising family, and how they respect when people start families in the community. In other respects, I see that they are very similar to any other kind of convent or monastery, and something that we wouldn't necessarily judge. But in those cases, there isn't the added element of family. But this is a community of religious people who also have families. Yeah, the key thing I felt is when you subscribe to a doctrine, you can't question anything, and then there's not much room for evolution. But at the same time, they have a strict set of rules that actually means that in some ways, because then when I went to the albergues and I saw the chaos and the confusion and the lack of, so there was lack of will in both cases, or the willful nature of the albergues, of people just doing whatever the hell they want and not being considerate of others, and then this community who never seem to rest apart from on Saturdays, and they work extremely hard and really, really work to support one another. I've been reading the book of the Essenes, and that's what I was reading on my Kindle as I was walking, was the book of the Essenes, which talks about the living God being true and scripture being dead. So this is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls that was discovered, and we are really, as humans, we're suckers for a quick fix of external authority. But life is much more dynamic than that, and God is infinitely everything, including infinitely evolving. So to have him down on a piece of paper as being just this is limiting and untrue. Another point I was considering is the authority of the text written by disciples. And then it was very interesting to then find out that Santiago was one of Jesus's disciples. Because yes, they had a unique perspective on Christ. And there are talks of being purified that they were purified by the grace of God, and after Jesus' death, but in general, they were imperfect followers. Inevitably, they had their own shit, they have their own problems, and certainly their own sexism in the days when Jesus was around. So the Bible is at best a second-hand perspective, and at worst it is a collection of projections and misunderstandings. And the very premise of doing a pilgrimage to worship the remains of a disciple is wrong. It's to show respect, yes, but it is to also show that we walk in the footsteps of a fellow human, learning from experience. I think it's beautiful that he is one of the disciples, because that's what we are. We're all disciples of that perfected Christ life that we could all aspire to live. But it was extremely satisfying when we got to the end. I was, the last 4 kilometers were the hardest. The feeling of the thing, the expectation. The last few days we chose a very strange path where there were no other pilgrims and no supermarkets, and it was a Sunday anyway. So we ate hardly anything the last few days, and we were stinking to high heaven. Hadn't washed in 3 days. So entering Santiago was amazing. I was joking because I had bought some Lidl socks. I'd bought some socks because my other ones had worn through. I bought them in Lidl. They had a big Lidl label on them. And as I was walking on the feet of Lidl, I was praying to the God of Lidl that I'd be able to visit this holy supermarket and buy what I needed and cook. So it was a very humorous journey, and there's so much that I can carry forward into my day-to-day life, which is including walking, and the beauty of it, and the really empowering sensation of walking. I could have walked the distance. All that you can see from this is more or less walking the whole of the west coast of France, and just that idea that I've almost walked back to England is extremely empowering. And I kind of feel like I can't be messed with now, and I kind of feel like there's nothing. We've done many sort of similar pilgrimages in the past with huge bags and much more aimless and much more chaotic and not knowing exactly where we're going to go. And this time it was nice because we had much lighter bags and we always had a path to follow. So in some ways this was easier than things that I've done in the past, although it was much more intense. But it gives that incredible feeling of internal power and a connection to something much, much more that's happening beneath the surface, because there were miracles all along the way, which I could go into, but it's It's almost too many to mention, but just the beauty, and I hope you can see through some of the videos that I've chosen here, but it's magic. It's really, really magical.
With these hands, I give what I can. With these hands, give what I can. Receiving from the mother the gift of this land. Love I am, living with a divine plan. I unholy human, a grain of sand. Love I am, living with a divine plan. Makers of life, hands that mend, cradling creation, the circle never ends. With these hands, I give what I can. With these hands, give what I can. With these hands, give what I can. With these hands, I give what I can. High unholy human, a single grain of sand. Love I am, living with a divine plan. Creators of life, hands that mend, cradling creation, the circle never ends. With these hands, love I am. With these hands, love I am. With these hands, I give what I can. With these hands, I give what I can. Receiving from the mother the gift of this land. Love I am, living with the divine plan. High unholy human, a single grain of sand. Love I am, living with the divine plan. Creators of life, hands that mend, cradling creation, the circle never ends. With these hands, love I am. With these hands, love I am, I am. With these hands, I give what I can. With these hands, I give what I can. I unholy human, a single grain of sand. Love I am, living with a divine plan. Creators of life, hands that mend, cradling creation, the circle never ends. With these hands, love I am. With these hands, love I am. With these hands, I give what I can. With these hands, I give what I can. Receiving from the mother the gift of this land. Love I am. I unholy human, a single grain of sand. Love I am, living with the divine plan. Creators of life, hands that mend, cradling creation, the circle never ends. With these hands, can love, I am